So to introduce myself, my name's Sarah's going to drop off. Okay. My name is Urban Kroll. I am the current chair for the National Cooperative Business Association Board of Directors. I also serve as executive director for the neighboring Food Co-op Association, which I'll be talking about in just a moment. We're going to go ahead and get started, I think. This is going to be interesting. Okay, so a little bit about our session. Cooperative enterprise has been part of the American economy since its beginnings and has played a particularly important role in rural communities. Many people may not be aware that 1 in 3 people in the US are actually members of a co-op, and the business model is being used in very new and innovative ways across the country. Co-ops are member-owned and democratically governed enterprises, enabling us to build communities in a more inclusive, sustainable, and resilient manner. And the real goal of this panel is to give you a sense of the breadth of options using the cooperative model as we rebuild from COVID-19. I have to rotate back and forth here. And so thankfully, you're not only going to have to hear from me today. We've got some great people who are going to be presenting on some of their work today. I'll just introduce them briefly, and then you'll hear from them in a minute. Carl Woodruff is a member of the Oxbow Design Build Cooperative and also serves on the board of directors of the Valley Alliance of Worker Co-ops. Lori Sapu is Rural Development Director for the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives. She's on your left there, I think. Paul Bradley is president of Rock USA and serves on the board of directors of NCBA CLUSA. Rob Brown is director of business ownership solutions for the Cooperative Development Institute. And Terence Courtney is director of cooperative development and strategic initiatives at the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund. So a little bit about what we want to touch on today. I just want to speak a little bit to our context, a little bit of background on co-ops in rural America, getting into what is a co-op. Even though co-ops are very prevalent in the American economy, they're not really taught that much about in colleges and universities, and much less business schools. And then talk a little bit about how co-ops can help us rebuild and give our presenters an opportunity to talk about the work that they're doing. And then get to some questions and feedback. So a little on our context. We're dealing with one of the largest recessions since the Great Depression. We're seeing a dramatic increase in small business closures, unemployment and job instability, housing insecurity, hunger and food insecurity, systemic inequalities that are exposing the challenges that people of color, women, and young workers in particular are facing, and a hunger for economic alternatives to help us envision a new economy. Which might lead us to ask, what if there was a business model out there that was based in self-help and participation, was rooted in our local communities, was accountable to the people that it served, put common good before private gain, was equitable and democratic, was accessible for everyday people, was flexible and innovative, and would it be too much to ask if it was a tested and proven model that had been tried at other times? Of course, this is not the first time we've asked these questions, and one of the times when we faced particular economic challenges was during the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s, when we saw severe dislocations of rural economies, dramatic shifts in wealth, concentration of economic control, limited political democracy, poor working conditions, low quality contaminated food, and by coincidence, the birth of the modern cooperative movement. Specifically, in 1844, a group of weavers, unionists, and community activists formed a member-owned grocery store with the goal of providing pure, affordable food for people in the community. But they also had a much broader vision for a cooperative commonwealth, and they established the principles for cooperative enterprise that continue to guide this business model. I think it is important to note that what the pioneers were really doing was building on traditions of mutual aid in our communities, whether you're talking about indigenous nations or cultural traditions of group ownership and mutual support. traditional agricultural activities you might be familiar with around land clearing, harvest activities, barn raising, road building. These were all sort of informal community activities that helped sustain and hold together our communities. And what the pioneers were really able to do was find a way to formalize those models and into a legal business model that people could use to protect, grow, and build their communities. And this model's been part of the American economy since the beginning. Benjamin Franklin's often credited with forming the first cooperative for protection of houses from fire. In 1780, there was the African Mutual Aid Society in Rhode Island. In the early 1800s, dairy co-ops began to form all over the United States. 1842 saw a really interesting cooperative experiment in worker cooperation as well as residential cooperation. This was a collective housing and work project in Northampton, Massachusetts, in a silk mill. And in 1866, there was the Chesapeake Marine Railway and Dry Dock Company in Baltimore, Maryland, which employed 300 Black boat caulkers in a worker cooperative. So it's a model that's been around for a long time. It's also a model that's enjoyed government support, particularly in rural America. The first state marketing statute enabling people to form co-ops was in 1865. By the 1920s, many states had adopted basic co-op statutes. And then there was a long series of federal legislation enabling particularly producers to form cooperatives to both sustain their family farms and build their communities. Today, many of us might be most familiar with cooperatives through the brands of some of these successful agricultural cooperatives who you'll find on grocery stores all over the country. What's particularly inspiring for me and in the context of this conference is the way so many of these cooperatives started. These were really just a few farm families gathering together, trying to figure out how to address their needs together. The Cabot Creamery Co-op began, for example. I don't even know if a member share was more than $15, but you also had to donate a bundle of firewood. And this was the beginning of this cooperative, which is now competing with multinational corporations on grocery shelves. What may be less familiar to people, and Lori can't say anything about this map because she's got the inside track on information here, is how much impact cooperatives have had on rural America across the country. And this map is actually of the more than half of the US land mass that's currently powered by cooperatives. And again, these were due to the community innovation of people in rural communities trying to figure out how to meet their own needs at a time when corporate utilities would not. And today, more than 56% of the land mass is powered by co-ops. More than half of America's family farmers are members of co-ops. CoBank, one of the largest providers of credit, is a cooperative. Mutual insurance was pioneered by farmers and their families. And credit unions are increasingly filling gaps left by banks in rural areas. We're also seeing a lot of innovation in rural areas. So while people might traditionally think of farmer co-ops, we're seeing a new wave of innovation in co-ops around home care for seniors, providing rural broadband for communities that still don't have access to the internet, financial services, clean energy, stable and affordable housing, food security, platform co-ops that can provide support for gig workers, information technology, child care, and business succession. Despite the prevalence of co-ops in the United States, it's still not that familiar to many people. And I find a lot of the presentations I have to do have to start with the basics on what a cooperative is and to really understand what makes this business model different. So the International Cooperative Alliance, which has been around since 1865, defines a cooperative as an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. You could also describe co-ops as sort of the first model for socially responsible business. They're based in self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity. What's different about them is they're not just trying to meet people's needs, they are also empowering those people to become owners of the entity itself. And co-ops have been so important in rural America. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has a program to support cooperative development, and also its own definition. It defines co-ops as user-owned businesses that are controlled by and operate for the benefit of their members rather than outside investors. I try to usually, I teach at the University of Massachusetts undergraduate in co-ops, and I try to find a number of ways to describe co-ops to help people really wrap their heads around what we're trying to do. And the summary I often use is a co-op is a legally incorporated business that's equitably owned and democratically controlled by its members, the people who use it to meet their own needs and goals. One thing that is unique to co-ops is that any money left over at the end of a fiscal year, what co-ops refer to as surplus or profit in a conventional business, is either reinvested in the enterprise or distributed among members, not according to how much they've invested financially, but how much they use the enterprise. So what do we mean by use? In a consumer co-op or purchasing cooperative of small businesses, it's the purchase of products or services. In a producer co-op, it's the volume of product processed, marketed, or distributed. And in a worker co-op, it's the labor you provide to that business. For the purposes of this conference, where people are really talking about rural development and entrepreneurship, I think it's useful to recognize how flexible the business model is in terms of its purpose. It can be used to secure employment or a livelihood, needed products, services, or shelter that you can't otherwise access, produce products or services together, process and add value to raw materials, or market products and services. You can also think about it in terms of its flexibility of industry. So we not only have agricultural co-ops and fishing co-ops, but there are food co-ops, worker co-ops, artisan co-ops, housing co-ops, credit unions, small business cooperatives, utility co-ops, health and insurance, etc. Like basically any type of business you can run using a conventional business model, you can also run using the cooperative model. It's also flexible in terms of who its core stakeholders are. So in a worker co-op, the members are the employees in that business. In a consumer co-op, it's its customers. In a producer co-op, it's the producers of raw materials. In a housing co-op, it's the residents of a building or a community. And you can even have a multi-stakeholder co-op that brings in different types of members to support the success of the enterprise. So co-ops have a unique contribution to innovation from my perspective. They're really a form of group entrepreneurship, which is a little different to what we talk about when we speak about entrepreneurship. It's a model designed to facilitate participation and innovation for the collective benefit of members in their community, not just now, but into the future. So I sometimes decide I'm going to make up my own word, which is co-operative, because entrepreneurship doesn't really cover it. So if you buy that term, we can talk about how co-ops can help us rebuild using this unique type of co-operative. Because what co-ops are really good at is developing local skills, assets, and creativity. They're able to pool very limited resources for community benefit. They're a form of community ownership, control, and participation. Their focus on meeting needs before maximizing profit enables them to be very flexible in the marketplace and do things that don't make market sense. They're able to build regional economic efficiencies. Once established, they're very difficult to move or buy out, which I think is an important asset for rural communities. They're able to root wealth in the community rather than speculative markets. And they can mobilize customer and stakeholder loyalty. Survey after survey shows that even when they don't totally understand what a co-op is, customers, consumers trust co-ops. They're willing to pay more for products from co-ops. They're willing to go out of their way to purchase from a co-op. They also have a very low business failure rate and are long-lived. And so because they're community owned, they root jobs, wealth, and infrastructure locally. And because they're more resilient, the investment communities make in this infrastructure lasts longer and has more impact in terms of employment and services over time. And this is just an image from a Canadian study that found that after 10 years, 44% of cooperative businesses were still in operation compared to 19.5% of conventional businesses. So I'm just going to say a few words about my cooperative by way of illustration. So the Neighboring Food Co-op Association is itself actually incorporated as a cooperative. Our members are 29 food co-ops across the Northeast. We also have 11 startup members. A key part of our work is co-op development of new food co-ops. We're jointly owned by over 152,000 members. We have shared revenue of $347 million. But that's just the beginning of the story of the impact of our co-ops. The average member share in one of our food co-ops is just $150. And with that member investment, people are able to build dramatic community infrastructure and impact, right? Our average food co-op is $12 million in sales. We had about 93 million in sales of local products last year. And in terms of rural economic development, it's important to note that local products at food co-ops average about 29% of total sales, compared with the national grocery store average of just 1.8. So if you're looking for a business model that's going to maximize impact on a local level, I would argue that a co-op is your best option. We also produce good, sustainable jobs. Together, our food co-ops employ about 2,350 people. More than 60% of that staff are employed full-time, and over 65% of them are also members, so they actually share in the ownership of the food co-op itself. This sustainable infrastructure can have a lot of impact over time. On average, our member food co-ops have been in business for more than 30 years. We also have a couple that have been in operation for 80 years. They actually grew out of the Great Depression as a response to the challenges of that time, and I think food co-ops can offer a very important mechanism for rebuilding at this time as well. We're also part of the National Cooperative Business Association, and just to speak to that for a moment, this is the cross-sector association representing co-ops and credit unions across the U.S. Our focus is on advocacy, public awareness, thought leadership, and co-op development. And our focus recently has been on the role of co-ops in building a more inclusive economy for everyone. And toward that end, we've been partnering with groups to do impacts of the study the impact of cooperatives to understand what they truly offer to the challenge of building a more inclusive, resilient economy. And this recent study put out by NCBA, the ABCs of Co-op Impact, really focused on the ability of co-ops to improve access to goods and services, to build businesses that are sustainable over time, that are committed to their local communities, to build democratic governance and empowerment for people from all walks of life, to build equity, diversity, and inclusion, and financial security for advancement for workers. Perhaps more important, or as important over time, is the ability of co-ops to grow and benefit more people as they grow and develop. So with that, I want to pass the mic to my friend Terence Courtney at the Federation of Southern Cooperatives to share a little bit about his work. And Terence, I think you're muted right now. And if you just want to say slide or any other word that you think is appropriate to get me to move to the next slide, please do so. Everyone, welcome Terence Courtney.
All right, thanks, Urban. Again, it's good to see you, man. I appreciate the opportunity. Well, you know, I always have to kind of start off, you know, especially occasions like these, by giving thanks. Because I feel very grateful to be invited to have this kind of conversation. So again, thanks, Urban, NCBA, neighboring and everybody, the participants. I think this is a great conversation, and the fact that it's focused on rural America which for the Federation is a place of critical importance, is great for us because so many of our members reside in rural communities. As it was kind of alluded to earlier, I want to situate my comments in terms of the context of the time and a little bit connecting that to our history. As y'all know, and as we said, we're living through a time of great change. It's permeated by intense challenges and opportunities. Yet, I'm not hearing very much or reading very much about how all that is relates to rural communities. And I think there is a place for that conversation because, you know, obviously all this taking place has an impact and it's really unfolding before our eyes. So thanks for opening this door to the conversation, and it's needed and we have to do more of it. I'm happy to speak, you know, but I'm really more excited about hearing from other speakers and some of the participants because we want to continuously add to our analysis of this situation. As it was said earlier, my name is Terence Courtney, and I'm the Director of Cooperative Development and Strategic Initiatives for the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. I have the privilege of working with members and the public on co-op development in 3 different levels. One, at the grassroots level, we work with folks who are just starting on their kind of pathway to cooperative development, people who are just starting to think about, you know, what this could mean, how it could be used. We also operate at a regional level, which I help coordinate with our state associations and state leaders to try to put together a framework that's very comprehensive, coordinated, and more uniform, because each of our state is also an autonomous cooperative organization. And the third level I work on is the international level, where I lead many of our efforts to build bilateral relationships with other cooperatives, for example, in Cuba and the Virgin Islands, which we hope will lead to some building, some bridge building, and hopefully trade between local cooperatives here in the U.S. and international cooperatives. But a little bit about the Federation for people in the audience who may not know. We're a 53-year-old regional cooperative institution based in Epes, Alabama, with offices throughout the South. The office I'm in now, my office is in Atlanta. And really, I think it's so coincidental that we're talking now because the Federation was born out of struggles like those we're facing today. During the late 60s, the winds of desegregation, much less economic justice, had not fully reached key parts of the South, especially in rural areas. So civil rights workers went into these areas and were themselves transformed by the people they encountered. They met people who were, yes, oppressed by Jim Crow and economic exploitation. But these same people demonstrated a capacity not only to withstand these cruel injustices, but develop at a very basic level, and I think Urban alluded to this, the future model of this organization, cooperatives. So in other words, people were already using a form of mutual aid or cooperative economics, and we built on that. So many of those early contacts were Black farmers as well as Black landowners who wrestled with an additional problem, and that was ongoing and systematic programs led by local forces, regional forces, and in some cases, national forces to rob Black communities of lands that they held. So the special combination of people, issues, and history came together to create a unique organizing model for that time. Some of the qualities I think that made the Federation unique and special, uncommon, if you will, were number one, early on, the organizers intersected issues of racial justice and economic justice with a bottom-up approach to organizing. They organized around Black rural communities versus major urban cities. Black women were central to the work and led and held key positions both in the local cooperatives and in the emerging regional structure. and Black farmers were the core membership from the very beginning. So out of this, our mission became clear: cooperative economic development, land retention, and advocacy. Back then, the battle was against overt forms of white supremacist, patriarchal economic exploitation. Today, we vie against more subtle, imperceptible to some, forms of intersecting oppressions. Now, add to this the confluence of climate change, COVID-19, and the economic downturn that has exacerbated longstanding economic, social, and health disparities that were already the norm in the Black community. These problems we're facing are very complex and multi-layered, but I think the Federation's special history and rural-based membership can provide us with a unique set of lenses through which to view these obstacles. So when one takes time to examine what's happening in rural America from a Black perspective, a Black Southern perspective, we find data that describes higher rates of economic and political disenfranchisement than what you find in urban areas, higher rates of policing and mass incarceration of Black and brown communities, more extreme health disparities. Rural hospitals are closing all over the place, and a particular direct impact from climate change. So I think by adding the Black rural context to our analysis, we get an even more comprehensive and nuanced understanding of what's happening in the United States with regard to issues of economic and social justice. People right now, as Urban mentioned, they're looking for answers. They're looking for alternatives to organization models and economic power, since clearly 50 years of neoliberalism has failed. They want to know about successful strategies, and they often ask us, what are our successes? And we have to say, well, the Federation's successes and even our challenges are deeply rooted here in the United States. To a degree, they have very broad implications, even international implications. But I'll just describe our successes in two ways. One, I'll call it interpersonal, and the second is institutional. The interpersonal successes involve using legal supports and advocacy to save individual Black lands and collectively held lands. We're developing co-ops that have been operating for decades. We started in 1967, 22 cooperatives forming the Federation. Today, we have more than 75. Plug it. I see the battery going down. So we've grown and we've maintained decades-long enterprises. We're using cooperatives to act and market collectively to maintain farmers' incomes. And we've created worker-owned cooperatives that are creating jobs at the local level. But I want to say and argue that our more influential successes were institutional. We created a 53-year-old organization of cooperatives based on a regional framework that has withstood political and financial attacks from local and national entities. We spearheaded the creation of programs that directly benefit rural communities and farmers, women of color, and women farmers, the 2501 grant for farmers of color and farmers. We spearheaded the Black farmer lawsuit that led to a small recoupment of resources to Black communities that had lost their lands. And we've recently won key victories in our campaign to democratize rural electrics. For example, in Alabama, the Black Warrior Rural Electric Cooperative for 80 years had no Black board members and paid no patronage to Black members. We've reversed that. We have 2 African-American board members now, and for the first time in 80 years, Black members are getting patronage. That's a historic win. So these successes us. For example, we want to identify 2 big barriers to cooperative in the South. Number one, structural barriers, such as the lack of enabling legislation. Also, the rules from the Small Business Administration regarding loans, where cooperatives, because they're collectively owned, often can't access. We have other barriers in terms of creating grassroots financial institutions, where the National Credit Union Administration's rules regarding the size of credit unions and its financial holdings are somewhat prohibitive to grassroots folks putting together their own financial institutions to escape the grip of predatory lenders. So we have a lot of work to do on that level. The cultural barriers, I'll say, are somewhat existential, where we have an aging farmer population, but not much of a youth cadre coming behind them to take over. Whereas at the same time, we're seeing growing interest among young urban farmers who largely are landless. So we have to figure out how to connect the dots between these communities. So clearly we have to create a cooperative development strategy that operates on multiple terrains and multiple levels. And one way we're addressing this is by providing constant and repetitive cooperative education. We're also strengthening our networks and institutions to support the co-op movement. And we're building cooperative bridges with other oppressed communities. We're using cooperative development to address specific needs Black families have, to provide relief to farmers reeling from COVID-based losses. And we're working to realize policy and legislative changes that empowers more diverse and robust cooperatives. So I'm describing a 6-point game plan for cooperative development. 1, co-op education. October 21st through 23rd, we're going to have our annual event called Co-op Econ, which is a 2.5-day deep dive on co-op education. We're building networks and institutions. We're building more state associations in the South. We're going to be working in Texas and South Carolina. And we're really working hard to transform this issue, this problem around credit unions, because I think that's going to be one of the keys to helping us finance our co-ops. We're building Black-Brown alliances. As I mentioned, in Texas, we're going to be working with a majority Latino community in the Calhoun County, Texas, on cooperative development. We're doing work we call Black Families Matter, where we're putting together child care cooperatives, telehealth cooperatives, housing cooperatives, and food cooperatives to meet the need we have now. We have COVID relief processes in place where we're doing assessments on our cooperatives and farmers and using that assessment system to pinpoint the delivery of relief resources. And again, we're advancing legislation by holding symposia to the public and elected officials. So our plan is undoubtedly broad in scope and it covers a lot of bases, but we want to try to connect the dots and connect with people on the multiple levels that they live each day. So I think this is an approach that could be useful for many other communities. I'm going to bring my comments to a close, but in essence, what I want to leave with you is that we believe the cooperative model can be a powerful instrument for change, fundamental change. Cooperatives can help us advance our economic interests at any level, in any industry, or in any sphere of society. Cooperatives have a historic root throughout the world, going back millennia, and it has international connections. It is built on values like fairness and sharing, and in our best examples, love. And I think you and I have a model with cooperatives that will enable us to organize ourselves to really move society in a new direction. So again, it's a wonderful opportunity to be here with you, to talk about this powerful opportunity we have for the future. And I look forward to everybody's questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Terence. That was fantastic. And again, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. I know you've got a lot going on and a lot of important projects in process. And it's just great to have the opportunity to share the Federation story with everyone. So really, really appreciate that. So if you do have questions for Terence, please hold them for the end. And now we're going to switch gears here, and we're going to ask Rob Brown from the Cooperative Development Institute, Business Ownership Solutions, to share with us some of his work around business succession, which is both a big challenge for rural communities as well as an enormous opportunity, as Rob will lay out for us. Rob?
Thanks, David. Thank you all for coming. And yeah, so if you could go to the next slide, Urban. So there's a couple of reasons why I think this is very timely, and to start with, and these are paint a picture by weaving together some data points here. There certainly have always been transitions to worker cooperatives. I think the difference today is there is a community of practice that are very intentionally focused on this strategy of business conversions, worker cooperative transitions, that's developing tools and processes and sharing amongst themselves to provide good quality technical assistance that can make the process efficient and effective. So I think that's the difference today. It's not to imply that this is a wholly new idea, the idea of transitioning an existing business into a worker cooperative. One of the great benefits, I think, to this, the unique advantages to this, is any business startup is inherently risky. It's a risky venture to start a business. There's an enormous amount of sweat equity that goes into that. One of the advantages we have with cooperative transition, worker cooperative transitions, is that we've gotten that startup risk out of the way, right? We're talking about going concerns. That's not to say it's necessarily easier, it's just that the challenges are very different. And that leads to a different approach, I think, for folks doing worker cooperative conversion, technical assistance, consulting, and so forth, to those who support startups. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But the other big difference right now is one of economics and demographics. And right now, if you take a look at some of these statistics, and I hope folks can read these pretty well, but I'll touch on them. Just the aging baby boomer demographic of business owners generally in our society, but it also holds true for business owners, obviously. We think about this a lot. There's a lot of public policy consternation about this when it comes to thinking about workforce, but there's less attention paid to the fact that the business owners are aging just as fast, and sometimes demographically even faster. So, nationally, over half of business owners are over age 55, but in most rural regions, it's over 60. And I think about where I live in rural Maine. The median age in rural Maine is a full generation older than the median age of any metro region in the United States. So it really can be extreme. The differences in just the age of populations that we're talking about when we're focused on rural areas. There's national research, a lot of national research that has looked at this, and the most recent study I've seen showed that business owner surveys showed 79% of business owners wanted to retire within 10 years, and over a third wanted to retire in less than 3 years. And if you understand anything about exit planning from a business owner should be taking a good 3 years or so at the very least to plan their exit. So that tells you that there's a big mismatch in what business owners want and what they're actually planning for. And in fact, the same research shows that while a lot of business owners are thinking they're going to retire in the fairly near future, very few of them are actually developing a plan for how to do that. And they don't understand the process or the options. They may be great business owners, they may have built great businesses, but they don't know how to get themselves out of those businesses in a way that preserves the businesses and can deliver some sort of retirement income for themselves. And then some of the broader economic factors around that, the fact that the liquidation and closure is the smaller and more rural a business is, the more likely the outcome of liquidation and closure of a business. So again, it's rural areas are affected even more. So the general picture here trying to paint is, lots of business owners. Business owners are older, way older in rural areas. They need to retire, want to retire, but they're not planning. They don't know how to plan. And in fact, that lack of planning is a primary reason for liquidation and closure. So if you can go to the next slide, please. And that is this somewhat cutesy title. The Silver Tsunami has been applied to this idea of a aging demographic of business owners and what it means for business ownership, for our communities' economies, for employment. A lot of these businesses might get bought, but many of them won't. And again, this all becomes that much more challenging in rural areas where there are just fewer people able to buy a business. So the next slide. And then if you overlay that, just what's going on right now, there's an increasing pressure on business ownership from the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So next slide, please. So just a couple of examples of businesses that we've worked with, different sectors, different sizes, a couple different stories. And there's these three buckets that I put these into, this idea of immediate exit, where there was either just lack of planning or death or disability of the owner, or perhaps a bankruptcy. And an example of that, and its lack of planning, is the Island Employee Cooperative in Stonington, Maine. Some of you may have heard this story earlier. The general manager of this cooperative was in an earlier workshop. But there's a large grocery store, a medium-sized grocery store, and an Ace Hardware, all owned. And they were owned by a man for 43 years who just felt, when he was ready to retire, he'd sell the businesses. And a good 2 years went by and he still had not sold the businesses. So one thing led to another, and we were able to help the workers buy those businesses. It was a very complicated transaction. There's a lot of case studies out there about it, including in the financing. But that's just an example of a group of workers who are as interested in preserving their own jobs as they were in preserving their community's assets. They were, I would say, equally motivated by both of those things. Another example is Rock City Employee Cooperative in Rockland, Maine. They have a cafe and a coffee roasting company. And this was an example of what I would call a phased exit. This is a woman who did it all right. Took 4 years and went through a process that had a lot of education for the workers, slow transition, slow turnover. She became a worker owner herself and then finally retired fully from the business about a year and a half after the transition. And then I want to point out, this isn't all about retirements and retiring business owners, but this idea of restructuring for growth, what I call that. But a lot of mid-stage entrepreneurs who look to this model of transitioning the company to worker ownership as a way to grow faster and more sustainably, faster and or more sustainably. And so InSource Renewables is a solar design, engineering, installation company in Maine that is an example of that. Mid-40s business owner with about 15 or 16 workers. And it was about him wanting to spend more time with his family while continuing to grow the company as quickly and as well as he had. So, next slide, please. And there's a lot of research out there about the success rates of worker ownership, worker-owned firms. In the interest of time, we'll skip that and just to the last slide, please. The idea of the transition process, just keeping in mind the distinction between the ownership of a company and the governance of a company and the management of a company, and the conversions that happen well and are most sustainable are those that are very clear about what they're doing at one time, and that a transaction is an ownership transition, but it is by no means a governance transition or a management transition. And you're really going to have a plan, a documented plan for all three. And then the last slide. And just to say, I live in Maine. I do work all throughout New England and into New York. But there are some other networks out there. Cooperation Works is a network of folks who do a lot of different types of cooperative development across the country. And then the Workers to Owners Collaborative is a national collaborative of groups who specifically do worker cooperative transitions for the most part, and learn from each other and share in that community of practice to do this work well. So, and that's, I'll turn it back to you, Urban.
Great, thank you, Rob. Sorry, time is tight. I do see some good comments and questions in there, so hopefully we'll have a little time at the end for a little bit more inquiry into some of what you're talking about there. For now, what we want to do is move to our next speaker, Carl Woodruff, who can talk a little bit about what worker cooperation looks like in practice. Carl Woodruff is a member owner at Oxbow Design Build Co-op. And I'm not sure, Carl, if you were going to mention anything about that transition there, but that might be useful for folks either in your presentation or the follow-up. So, Carl, welcome.
Thank you, Urban. And yeah, I'd be happy to talk more about our specific transition in the follow-up if anybody has specific questions about that. Rob, I really appreciated a lot of what you said about succession planning, and I think it really goes hand in hand with retention, which is what we've really been focused on a lot here. When businesses retain employees, they're able to see greater productivity, they build reputations for consistent and reliable work, and workers experience financial stability with jobs they can count on. And the communities really have an opportunity to develop truly resilient economies. And I think that this worker retention piece is it's really important in the context of succession and in long-term planning for a business. I think it's easy to agree that the benefits of worker retention are significant, and I really think that the question is just how do businesses best retain workers. For our company, Oxbow Design Build, becoming a worker co-op has really been at the heart of our success in worker retention. And with that, I'd like to just talk a bit about how worker-owned cooperatives can retain workers and can save jobs and can support a local economy. And so Urban touched on some of these principles a bit already, but for those of you who aren't familiar, a worker-owned co-op is a business in which the workers have equal ownership of the company. The workers have equal voice in matters of governance, and they enjoy an equal share of the financial successes of the company based on their labor contribution. As with other cooperative models, a key principle of worker co-ops is equal voting rights. It's really one worker, one vote. And this ensures that the decision-making for company governance is truly in the hands of and the interests of the workers and not outside stakeholders. In this model of worker co-ops, the workers really are the members, and we are the member owners. And so these terms start to really overlap. And Urban, could you go to the next slide, please? When a worker first comes on, there's usually a member in training period before they become a member owner. But the goal in a worker co-op like our own is really that all workers make their way to company ownership. This can be a little bit different from other types of cooperatives, just specifically in that the continuation of a worker co-op really relies on all of its workers moving in a direction of ownership and staying in that role of ownership on a continuing basis. Cooperative businesses can take a lot of different forms, as Urban already outlined, and I think that definition that you shared from the USDA, Urban, about cooperatives really kind of speaks to how I see a worker co-op, which is that cooperatives are really defined by the use of their members. who are in fact the owners. And so, a lot of people hear about co-ops and they think of grocery stores and farming cooperatives. And at your local food co-op, for instance, the members there use the co-op through buying groceries. And in agricultural cooperatives, the member owners are using the co-op by selling what they've produced on their farms. In a worker co-op, the use of the business really is employment, or labor, as Urban put it. And as I see it, what really defines a worker co-op is that its member owners are working there. That's really the goal. Now, of course, worker co-ops are going to provide any number of goods and services. In our case, we primarily design and build houses and commercial spaces and the furniture and fixtures that occupy those spaces. We seek to be profitable like any other business and to provide our services well to our clients. But at the end of the day, our bottom line is really that we provide gainful and meaningful employment to our workers. This principle of employment being our bottom line really came to life for us when COVID-19 started shutting down industries across the world. In the weeks and months following the first shutdowns, we went through many phases of operating restrictions. First, they were self-imposed measures so that we could protect our workers and clients, then clients canceling and postponing, and then state orders to stop non-essential business activity. So by the end of March, over 80% of our regular business activities had ceased until further notice. I know this is something that a lot of businesses can relate to. We're seeing it across all sectors. At that time for us, we were looking at our books and we really had to make a choice. Either everyone who was unable to do their job because of these restrictions is sent home, and we would cover our overhead for up to 8 months, is what we predicted, while we waited for something to change. Or we could keep everyone on payroll and cover our overhead for 8 weeks. So we looked at our bottom line together, that we provide gainful and meaningful employment to our workers. And it was really clear right out of the gate that what we were going to do was keep everyone employed as long as we could. We just needed to figure out what meaningful work everyone would be doing. So with our workers being owners, everybody had a real vested interest in trying to ensure that we were not just getting paychecks, but what we were doing was something really meaningful and hopefully something that generated revenue. And there was a lot of creative ideas happening at that time, coming from all the workers, coming from ourselves. And notably, we had a particular opportunity to increase our design services, which we could still safely do. So we were pursuing that. There were a few other ideas that came up, and we were pursuing all of these revenue generating ideas, but it was also increasingly clear that not everyone was going to have the opportunity to be making money for the company until we were able to resume our normal business activities. And so that's why we pivoted part of our operations to manufacturing and donating face shields for 8 weeks. And I don't want there to be any mistake about the way I'm describing this arc for us. The relief programs of the federal government really helped us keep our doors open and kept our shop workers receiving paychecks after we ran out of money making face shields. But our decision to prioritize the employment of our workers, even when it meant doing something that we never done before, and that decision to really uphold our bottom line and to acknowledge that what defines our company is our employment and not our profitability, that is what really positioned us to get back in the black after the state started lifting restrictions. And when clients wanted us back in their homes again, I think it was that momentum, which was why we were able to successfully acquire a competing design firm whose owner decided to retire when COVID hit, and they had no succession plan.
Mhm.
And ultimately, that's why we've been in the position of buying machines to increase our shop's capacity rather than having to close our own.
That's great.
Uh,
We're almost at time on this. Did you have another slide you want me to move forward on?
oh yeah, I'm sorry. If you could please move
Oh, there you
forward.
go. Yeah, yeah.
Thank
sorry.
you. Yeah, so I'll skip ahead here a little bit. I just wanted to, also talk about how, our successes were not just self-driven. Being a worker co-op and participating in a cooperative economy is really, by definition, not something to do alone. And we were very fortunate to connect with the Valley Alliance of Worker Cooperatives, or VOC, when we started our conversion process. VOC really guided us through our conversion. They provided many valuable resources, and they were critical in the success of our conversion. Through VOC, we continue to regularly connect with other area co-ops and support each other through these connections. And I'd be happy to talk more about VOC and what those sort of organizations can look like if anybody has questions later on. So with that, I'll pass that back to you, Urban. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carl. That was great. Really appreciate that, and a great story. And thank you for taking the time. I thought it was particularly helpful illustration just about particularly how worker co-ops get creative when they need to, and their priority is the jobs and livelihoods rather than the bottom line. And that's one of the things that the co-op model enables you to do. This seems like a great transition from design build to housing security. And I barely touched on housing. Early in the presentation, I talked about the Rochdale Pioneers, and one thing that was interesting about them, they started their grocery store, and very soon after they had accumulated enough capital, they started building houses for their members. So housing has been, part of the movement from the beginning. But Paul and Rock USA have really been approaching this in a very creative and innovative way that I think has a lot of benefits for some of the folks in our communities that need it most. So Paul, looking forward to your story. Please share.
Thank you very much, Urban, and thanks to everyone for joining us. This has been one grande-sized cup of co-op coffee and really pleasurable. So thanks everybody for great remarks. In most rural communities, the largest source of affordable housing, generally speaking, are the mobile homes in mobile home parks. It really is across the country, in most places, mobile home parks are the largest source of unsubsidized affordable housing, and by and large, they represent home ownership for low income and very low income homeowners, people that have worked very hard to gain ownership of their housing stock. But it comes with a fundamental weakness, which is, as most of you know probably on this call, they own their homes, but they rent the land underneath it. So much like our good friends at the Federation, land ownership is a incredibly important, powerful win for low-income communities and communities of color, and it has long-term benefits. You have to own something at the end of the day to build wealth and build security. And that's really our story. We started in 1984 here in New Hampshire. The New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, a community loan fund, a CDFI, that began helping homeowners buy their communities as co-ops, and has grown the sector to close to 35% market share in New Hampshire. I worked for the Community Loan Fund for about 20 years, and in 2008 launched a national social venture called Rock USA to take the cooperative model in mobile home parks to scale across the country. And to do so, we have worked with a whole lot of nonprofits, including the Cooperative Development Institute, and are scaling this up. So next slide, Urban. We'll just get into it here. First off, people have very old ideas about mobile homes. In fact, legally, since 1983, the correct term is manufactured home. This is a HUD code product built in a factory. But regardless, when I say mobile homes, people generally go back to travel trailers or trailers. And what you see in the picture here is really the evolution of the housing stock from the 50s through the 70s and into the 21st century. But while the housing stock has in fact improved tremendously, the underlying land ownership model, that is a commercial investor that owns the land and rents the land to a homeowner, has not changed. And that's what cooperative ownership and Rock USA are out to demonstrate, that homeowners, when they band together, can in fact buy the land and successfully manage the property. Next slide. So just a little bit of context, there are over 8 million HUD code manufactured homes out there. Most of them are on fee simple sites. So our friends in Appalachia would know most manufactured housing in that market are in fact on their own land or land of a family member. And then there's 2.7 million of these homes that are actually organized in communities, manufactured home communities or mobile home parks or trailer parks, trailer courts in some markets. And there are about 44,000 of these. What defines a mobile home park is, in most state law, any single parcel of land with 2, 3, or 4 or more units on it. In other words, when you have a single parcel of land and you rent that land out to, let's just say, 4 or more owners of mobile homes, you in fact have a mobile home park under most state law. And there are 44,000 of these. Some of them are enormous, keep in mind, thousands of units. The average size community is is just over 80 homes. Our mission is to make resident ownership both viable and successful, and really to expand economic opportunities for homeowners and communities. We work in many markets. Next slide. And we do so in those blue states, no political comment there, just the color of the slide. But regardless, we do so in currently 17 states with currently 10 and soon 11 technical assistance providers. So one half of Rock USA social venture is a network of nonprofits that are all organized around supporting the development of a single type of resident-owned community. For us co-op folks, it's a limited equity housing cooperative type entity. But regardless, we are all committed to a basic cooperative model. We're all committed to basic organizing principles and ethics. And we're all committed to building both pre-purchase and post-purchase training and education to support these communities long term. That is, and those are our affiliates there. And we've just added California with the California Coalition for Cooperative Development. We work with many cooperative technical assistance centers like Cooperative Development Institute here in New England. The other half of Rock USA, next slide, is in financing. Oops, I didn't build a slide for this. So critical to cooperative ownership, it's true in worker cooperative conversions, it's true in resident-owned communities, is access to financing. So we've not only organized a network of nonprofits committed to quality technical assistance, supporting a single type of cooperative enterprise in a specific sector, and we only do one thing. But we've also organized capital. So we have on the other side of the house a Community Development Financial Institution, CDFI, where we've accumulated capital, raised capital to support effectively the specialized financing that makes these communities, makes resident ownership and a purchase viable for low-income homeowners. And as I said, this is focused on a limited equity cooperative model. Today, we're in 17 states, almost 18,000 members, and we're demonstrating impact. Co-ops in our network are raising their monthly site fees, their lease payment for the land, at less than 1% per year, whereas the industry average, stated in industry journals, is 3.9%. And if you go to our website, rockusa.org, that's rocusa.org, there's actually a calculator there. And it is remarkable. When you play out 0.9% versus 3.9% over 10, 20, or 30 years, the savings are enormous for gaining ownership of the land. Next slide. Really, this is a model that works extremely well in low-income neighborhoods because of the low share price that we're able to finance based on raising specialized capital. So we serve a large number of Latinx communities. These gentlemen are from McMinnville, Oregon, and our partner there, Casa of Oregon, helped that community purchase the community and actually rehab and replace many of the homes. That type of rebuild is rare. Mostly what we do is preservation and community improvements, but there was an opportunity to improve housing quality there, and Casa of Oregon helped deliver that. Next slide. And at the end of the day, this really does come down to security. Homeowners who bought their home are just blown away at the increases in the underlying land cost when they rent the land. And the other significant risk, of course, is communities can be closed down by the commercial owner and redeveloped. So gaining security, gaining ownership of the land, when it's possible, is a high priority for homeowners. And that's why our services, training and education, both pre-purchase and post-purchase, and financing, really help solve a significant problem. And because of much more news on the subject, John Oliver covered the mobile home park industry in April of 2019. If you haven't seen it, it's worth watching. And so homeowners now really know the industry that they've bought into, and they're highly motivated to gain ownership when they have that opportunity. And our objective is to be there and providing that opportunity for them. I think that's the last slide, Urban. I'm happy to take questions later.
All right. Thank you so much, Paul. That was great. And yeah, I hope quite a few folks who are watching that could see how applicable this could be in so many of our rural communities, particularly with the way that housing is so much at risk right now. I actually meant to, in my presentation, pull out a couple statistics just around the level of housing insecurity right now and the risk, but didn't quite manage to get that in there. I don't know if you have any statistics off the top of your head, but it's a really hard situation with people not being able to pay rent, not being able to pay mortgage payments. This could be a very challenging situation.
Oh yeah, I don't think it's hit quite yet. It's just starting to emerge. It's going to be deep and severe, and what we know from working in low-income communities, it'll once we do get to the end of the dog, the tail on this is going to be very, very long. People have dug very deep holes, so when moratoriums end and evictions ensue, this is going to be a wave, I'm afraid. Yeah. We have seen it in our data. We do grants for homeowners and members in our communities that are affected by COVID medically. And we have seen this in our data set, the impact on Latinx families, in our little world. So it's real and deep in communities of color.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So for our final presenter today, we have Lori Sapu from the North Dakota Rural Grocery Initiative. And I think this is a great example of the way, I don't want to call electric co-ops old guard, but but this previous wave of cooperative development is now investing in and exploring new ways that they can spur new cooperative development that can support communities in new ways. So looking forward to your comments, Lori.
All right, well, thank you, Urban, and I truly appreciate this opportunity to be with all of you today. In North Dakota, cooperatives have been a longstanding business model that we've relied on for decades. Our population is so small, so to improve our competitiveness, we pool our resources to get what we need. Sometimes our low customer base doesn't entice that free market to build in our rural communities. So cooperatives are how we got electricity and phone service to our rural places. It's how we aggregate, market, and process some of our commodities, or at times it's how we operate our grocery stores, our childcare facilities, or our meat plants. So a current dilemma in our state, and most probably throughout much of rural America, is a struggle to keep our rural grocery stores competitive and, quite frankly, open. Over the past 6 years in North Dakota, we've lost 20% of our stores in towns with a population of 2,100 people or less. And so when you think about that, North Dakota only has 24 towns in it that does not have 2,100 people. So that's most of our population, most of our land mass. Most typically when the grocery store closes, it's the last one in town. So to try to stop this decline, we organized a task force, calling it the North Dakota Rural Grocery Initiative in 2014. This task force represents a cross-section of rural grocers and resource providers, both public and private, that have come together to address our struggles with rural food access. We have collected data over the past 6 years to inform the public and policymakers of the issue, and we have used the data to instigate a change. So what you're looking at right now on the screen is what food access looks like in our state. The green and orange spaces indicate a grocery store and a 10-mile circumference around that store. The orange is simply illustrating the areas where the stores have been converted to some sort of nonprofit model, either cooperative or community-owned or a 501c3. We wouldn't have these stores without a concerted community effort. And as you can see, we're starting to have some sizable distances between our grocery stores. The pink areas are where people need to drive 10 miles or more to access a full-service grocery store. And according to USDA, the people that live in these spaces are more apt to suffer health consequences such as diabetes or obesity. Next slide, please. This chart illustrates our volume problem. An average US grocery store has a weekly sales volume of $320,000. The average volume of our rural grocery stores is $20,000. And this is significant because wholesale prices are based on volume. Most typically, the larger the volume, the lower the retail price. With our data collection, we did learn that several of our small stores drive to big box stores in urban places to secure some of their products for their shelves because the retail prices were lower than their wholesale prices. Slide, please. And this mapping shows there is room to streamline the rural distribution system. We have 4 primary suppliers in the state. Each color represents a different supplier on the map. When we plotted the delivery routes, we learned there wasn't necessarily service territories, but rather minimum purchasing requirements. So to a large extent, the minimum purchasing requirement dictates which supplier serves which store. It's their business model. So for instance, the lowest cost supplier may have a policy that a store needs to purchase a minimum of $40,000 in product per week before they'll stop there. So what we have is we have several trucks with essentially the same products driving the same roads, delivering small volumes. When we simply optimize these routes using geospatial mapping, we learned that there could be close to $400,000 in annual transportation savings. Now keep in mind, this is just the primary supplier. We also have more than 50 direct store distributors delivering to these stores as well. These are the single line suppliers for products such as bread, milk, chips, soda, or frozen pizza. The continued retail consolidation has been a threat to rural main streets for quite some time. It's a system that's designed to bring the lowest prices to urban places. It draws rural people to shop elsewhere for price and variety, especially since many rural people earn lower wages and they need to make their dollars stretch. We have quietly lost much of our traditional rural main streets over the past few decades, but the loss of the only grocery store really hits hard. I've been doing rural development work for 23 years, and I can say that among all rural development activities, rural people work the hardest to keep their grocery store open. It's difficult to keep people in your community if they don't have local access to food. It's even harder to attract people to move there. Employers depend on being able to recruit employees to their businesses. Schools depend on families living in that area. We need a new system that will serve rural people better. Next slide, please. With the financial assistance of CoBank, which is a national cooperative bank serving rural America, we've been given the opportunity to try to redesign how we work regionally to improve rural access to food. Leaning again on the cooperative model for solutions, we're in the process of developing a redistribution hub, which is basically a combination of a purchasing cooperative and an expediting cooperative. And I'm hoping to use this map to help you imagine what we're trying to accomplish. I do apologize for using so many graphs and no pictures. I know that's not a good plan. Our pilot project is in northeastern North Dakota, involving 5 small communities, 3 with a grocery store and 2 without. So number 1 on this map is an existing grocery store that will serve as the dedicated redistribution hub. By redistribution, we mean the products are in and out the same day. It is not a warehouse. The population of this community is about 1,350 people, and it is by far the largest community involved in this hub. Numbers 2 and 3 are communities with smaller existing grocery stores. 1 is independently owned and 1 is community owned. Stores number 1, 2, and 3 will place their orders through the redistribution hub, and the total order will be delivered to the hub, which is store number 1, by the supplier. Store number 1 has adequate backroom space and space to hold frozen and refrigerated foods during the sorting and pre-delivery time period. We've been able to document an average of 15% price difference on wholesale food products between stores just 15 to 20 miles from each other, simply based on volume. The cooperative purchasing increases the total volume for the region, improving the price for all communities. It will also help improve variety, as the stores will be able to share in cases of product at a volume discounted price. So number 5 on the map is a community without a grocery store, but an individual living there is interested in operating a small one. Number 5 can simply join the cooperative rather than worrying about attracting a supplier for a small store. Again, the increased volume will benefit all. And number 4 is another community without a grocery store. They are interested in a climate-controlled grocery locker system. Slide, please. This system includes lockers that hold ambient, frozen, and refrigerated products, an online ordering software system, and a climate-controlled delivery truck. The people in community number 4 would be able to place their orders online using a credit card to store number 1. Store number 1 would shop the order and deliver the products to the locker and send either a text or email message informing the customer the product has been delivered and assign them a code. The customer goes to the lockers, enters the code, and the assigned doors pop open. Once the product is picked up, the store receives confirmation the transaction is complete. And understanding that we are working in rural spaces, online is an option that we're offering, but they're also going to keep that personal touch as well for those that do not want to shop online. So by including the locker system in the redistribution hub, we'll bring 1 small store online, we'll have a delivery truck for the hub, and we'll hopefully bring healthy food access to 2 small communities without. We anticipate this could also be a way to hub local foods, where suppliers of local produce, bakery items, inspected meats, or other products could deliver to the hub and have their products delivered on the same truck as the conventional wholesale products. And there could be other business partners as well, depending on what is available within that regional economy. For example, a local pharmacy could use the hub to distribute pharmaceuticals to the region, or a florist, or any other local retailer that could benefit from a distribution channel. We have learned through our research that it's up to us to come up with the models that serve us best. Our needs will not entice the industry to change because our customer base is just too small. It's not where they're making their profits. And we need to keep in mind that the free market is not mandated to serve places where they're not making money. However, there is power in cooperation, and our rural neighboring towns are our partners, not our competitors. Supporting each other will only make us stronger. And so thank you for your time today, and Urban, I'll turn it back to you.
That was awesome, Lori. I loved the graphics. I was particularly impressed by how clearly you all are using high-tech information to build this system. I thought that was awesome. Yeah, and I see some of the comments. It seems like it's a really interesting and innovative idea to a lot of folks out there. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'd learned a little bit about this, but honestly, I have a much deeper understanding of it now. I really appreciate it. All right, so we're a little over time. Not bad though. I want to make sure we have a little time for any questions that come forward. We do have a little bit of cushion too. There are a couple slides, so before we wrap up, just want to share, Terence had mentioned Co-op Econ. So I think, Terence, if people go to federation.coop, they should be able to find all of your upcoming events, right? So that's one resource. I put that in the chat. The other thing that's coming up very quickly here, October's Co-op month. It's actually been celebrated since 1964, since the USDA started celebrating it nationally. The theme this October is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really challenging co-ops on their values and principles and how they can be more inclusive of their communities. And right at the beginning of October is the Co-op Impact Conference. And I think it's going to be, it's a full week actually, a full week of events, $35 if you register early. I think it only goes up a little bit more after that, but I think before the end of the month, if you register, it'll be a great conference and a great opportunity to learn about co-ops just across sectors. So it's one of those few opportunities where you can really learn about the breadth of the cooperative business model and what we're up to. The other thing I'll share, so I think you can find everybody's contact information through the conference, but just wanted to put this up there, websites, email addresses, and I'm going to turn off the slideshow so that hopefully Sarah can rejoin us. We're going to try this out because she's been tracking your questions. Didn't work, did it? Let's see, how do we do that? Well, Sarah, it looks like we've hit another snag. Now it won't let me go. How about this?
We have lost our moderator.
I think he pressed the wrong button.
We did.
I will rejoin. Hopefully I can let Urban in. It looks like we still have a place. I don't know what happened there, but well done, everybody. That was so interesting. And I learned so much. I'm just so thrilled. And the comments have been rolling in. Lots of good conversations happening. I'll just address the direct questions, I think. It looks like I think this probably is a question for you, Rob. Landon was talking about, how complex financing can be, but sort of wondering about overall where should folks look for capital to buy out a business owner? Like, what's a good strategy for that?
Yeah, the seller. These deals seem to come together with some meaningful, substantial portion of some seller financing. We work with a variety of community development finance institutions that will finance deals that we bring them. So it's a mix. as with any cooperative development, well, I should say any, with most cooperative development, the member equity is not gonna like get you over the hump. You're not gonna start a business typically on member equity. You need something. So I think at the end of the day, the deals that we do are essentially leverage buyouts. So there is quite a bit of debt or held on to equity by a selling owner, but we can bring the financing together.
Great. Great. Thanks so much. There are some other comments and questions, but I'll just throw this out to the group in case anybody else hadn't seen these. Just sort of thinking through, you know, Sebastian was saying, you know, it's his understanding that cooperative businesses are governed and run by boards of directors. You know, thinking through how do we train leaders to share power and leadership in these models, and what kind of investments are we making in boards and to help them learn how to practice shared leadership. But this might be, you know, this is a good question for maybe everybody.
I mentioned in the chat, I actually had a slide for this presentation that showed a basic structure for co-ops. I'll speak on this for a second. I mean, what I find most beautiful philosophically about the co-op model, but also pragmatically in terms of why it's effective, is it's a circular governance structure, right? In a traditional model, you've got investors, board of directors, management, and then they are producing goods and services for customers and trying to maximize profit. What a cooperative does is it takes the workers in the middle of that structure and or the customers, the people purchasing services at the end, and puts them back at the top of the structure. So the members are the owners and controllers of the entity. They then elect a board, which then hires management. So that circular nature makes the key stakeholder in the business the group that also owns and controls it. Where it can get confusing is probably two spots. One, where I mentioned multi-stakeholder co-ops, where you can have different groups be part of that membership and board structure. You can also have collective management structures, which is much more common in worker co-ops. But even though officially, when they incorporate, there's a board of directors and a manager, it may not actually be that operational day to day. And really the way that the co-op is managed is with a flat hierarchy, right? With everybody sharing in the work, sharing in the supervision, sharing in the planning. And it's a great model. There are very large co-ops that use that model. But back to the education piece, that type of governance structure takes a very deliberate and strategic educational and capacity building process so people understand what they're part of and how to engage in it. Just as it is when you have members who, so in our food co-ops, right, we have food co-ops that have anything from 500 to 10,000, 20,000 members. They may not have any work experience, any governance experience, but they can be elected to a board. And then it is the responsibility of the cooperative to educate and empower those people to be part of the governance structure, which again is what makes the model so powerful. You are developing people's leadership skills, their ability to have control over their lives, to make business decisions in a way that they would never have had access to otherwise. And that's part of the radical nature of the cooperative model. And I'll stop there. Would anyone else like to add?
Yeah, this is Terence. I hear an echo. I don't know.
I'll turn off some microphones, Terence. Go ahead.
Yeah, I like what you said, and I like the circular model, I guess, metaphor that you use, because I think that's the same kind of way we describe it, because everything begins and kind of loops back into the members. I think the one thing I'd add is that what you described has to be an ongoing process. Something you do, say, once with an orientation and leave it at that, because what we find is that, you know, at the local level or even, you know, at the regional level, people come on and off the board with kind of different backgrounds, different ideological dispositions. And so they don't always fully understand the principles of a co-op or their responsibility to uphold those principles. And so it can be a struggle because I think, people are so ingrained with this kind of very individualist or single owner model. So they get on a board and they're between the principles of cooperative development and kind of people's personally held beliefs. So it takes time to work through that. It's both something you do in a workshop or a classroom, but I think you also have to give people opportunity to put that stuff in practice.
I would just like to say a word about resources. And
Anyone else want to chime in?
This is Lori. Can you hear me? I
Would
just like to say.
Oh, I think you're muted, Lori. Were you saying something?
We can hear.
Am I muted? Okay. I
Hold
just
it.
wanted to mention resources and that there are cooperative development centers that serve the entire United States, and they do some board of director training. I think that sometimes it's overwhelming to like start up a co-op, manage a co-op. It's not your main line of business, so it's good to have other entities that can help you out. Also, some of the longer standing co-ops like rural electric cooperatives and the telecommunication cooperatives, they have board of director training that most certainly would welcome in other cooperatives to their training as well, just to learn the basics of governance.
Yeah, and associations play that role too. Yep, great. We don't have a ton of time left, Sarah. Did you see any other comments come forward or questions? Can't hear you. Sarah, we can't hear you.
Sorry.
Okay, gotcha. No, gotcha.
Yeah, there we go. Just looking through, there's been a lot of good just conversations happening. I think the next question I see, someone was looking at good resources and direction for incorporating food co-ops. Like they live in Arizona. There's some really poor laws, and this Landon, he's hitting some roadblocks and finding a meaningful way to kind of move forward on incorporating.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody's got some thoughts on that, or if you maybe do that.
That's definitely something we do at NFCA. We're in the Northeast, but two resources I'd send you to quickly: our food co-op initiative, which is fci.coop, and they can help with some of those questions. The other point I'd make on incorporation, and Terence pointed to this a little bit as well. Not every state has good co-op law. Not every state has co-op law that's flexible enough for all the different forms you might want to take. But we've actually had experience. You can form under another statute and be treated like a co-op for tax purposes. I personally think that's a little risky because it means you're not really, you're forming as another entity, but not necessarily integrating the co-op principles into your legal structure. And what we usually recommend to our food co-ops is, believe it or not, it is not that difficult to incorporate in another state that has good co-op law. All it really means you have to do is send your annual report to that state, but otherwise everything else is legal and straightforward. So if you want advice on a good state to incorporate in that has good co-op law for food co-ops, I'd be happy to point you in that direction.
Great. I didn't see any other like direct questions. Just again, like lots of good conversation happening, and we have some folks with some expertise sharing resources and answering questions in the chat, which is always cool to see. So I'm not sure if anybody else has any other thoughts, but probably just pass it back to you, Urban, for closing.
Okay. I guess I'll thank the Heather Grimes Center and Radically Rural for this opportunity. I personally fluke. I was actually in college doing work on indigenous economic development and trying to understand what models were working. And by a fluke learned about indigenous communities in Mexico that had used the cooperative model to basically run everything in their community, from language schools to clinics, and then I learned, you saw that first co-op slide from Canadian Texas. That's the town my father and grandfather were born in. I learned way too late in life that my grandfather had spent his entire career in co-ops. I thought he was a banker, and it turned out he worked for Farm Credit for his entire career. And the first time we had a conversation about co-ops, it blew my mind. And I have ever since kind of frankly resented that I didn't learn about co-ops earlier in my life. I didn't learn about them in school. I had to go to a school in Nova Scotia to get a degree in cooperative management because we don't have that here. And every time I look around and I see the challenges in our communities, I see the legacy of cooperatives in our communities, like the electric co-ops, like the ag co-ops, these amazing stories of the ways that people have built up their communities themselves, the struggles of groups like the Federation. Frankly, when I learned about the Federation, again, I felt like I had been deprived of probably one of the most important stories that I should have learned about in high school. And so I guess what I'm getting at is I have a pretty strong passion for this, obviously, and I hope that I and our guests here on this panel have given you a little bit of a sense of not only the legacy and history of this business model, but the way it can be an answer, both for the challenges that we have moving forward and also the opportunities we can do together, empowering our communities to meet their own needs, meet their own goals, and lift each other up together. And I hope you've gotten a taste of that, and I hope you'll take away some ideas on how you can use co-ops in your communities. And feel free to reach out to any one of us if you have questions or ideas on how we can support you. And before we have to end, I want to invite any one of my panelists to add anything in closing. Anyone like to jump in? No volunteers. Everyone's exhausted.
Thank you, Urban, for leading us today.
Yeah,
Well,
I'd say that too.
thank you.
I think you summed it up pretty well. You tied a very nice bow to the package.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank Sarah for jumping in halfway through on this. And I want to thank you all. This was a pretty quick job for us to figure out how to pull this all together. And you were all amazingly flexible and helpful and forgiving in all of our challenges here. And I want to thank everybody who joined us for rolling with what has now become our daily experience of technological wonders and challenges. So maybe with that, we can wrap up. I think 3:45 is when we're supposed to wrap up. Sarah, I don't know if you want to close this down right away or if you want to invite anybody to stay on for further conversation. I'm open to where you want to take us.
Yeah, we can stay on if folks are up for it. It looks like I'm just keeping my eye on the comments here. Yeah, if folks want to jump on and ask more questions, they can, but I'm also happy we can transition. Got our closing keynote happening soon.
Yeah. If nothing's coming forward, maybe we should just let people take a break. I know being online.
Appreciation and gratitude I see on the side. All of you taking the time, and thanks to everybody out there, and thanks to our panelists for being patient with the tech. Pleased that it went smoothly. So once we got going, so thank you so much.
Great.
Awesome.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all very much. Take care. Have a good rest of the conference.
Be well.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well.